This video contains a lot of talk and imagery about insects and arthropods, including spiders. This video contains both spoilers and speculation, and assumes you have finished the game at least once.
Turn back now, ye tarnished, lest ye be spoiled. Ugh.
Quick announcement at the beginning: if you are an Elden Ring content creator watching this video, feel free to leave me a message on Discord, Twitter, or even email, links all in the description. I intend to start a podcast talking a little bit more casually about Elden Ring, and I'd love to get a chance to work with others in the community, or even just a chance to have more people to talk to about Elden Ring, because as you can tell, I really like this game. I'd also like to do a few quick shoutouts. Firstly, Salin/Rinboz, whose tweet is on the screen now. Their tweet will be the initial crux of the theories and questions we have to discuss today. Secondly, Zeostorm, whose work I'm sure you're familiar with. His tweet about it was the first thing I saw and fully inspired this video. And finally, I want to thank Zinjinu, I've definitely mispronounced that, aka Quelag and Centrina, both of whom have really inspired me recently, and both of which have done some wonderful, interesting work. All of their links are down in the description and pinned comment. Salin's tweet shows the Cleanrot Knight's waistcoat and suggests that it is inspired by a four-winged insect of some sort. Firstly, let's talk about a few of the insects that I've seen often suggested that I don't think influence the designs of the Cleanrot Knights. Firstly, mayflies or damselflies. I definitely think this is by far the most likely of the options. I don't necessarily believe in it myself, however. The wings of the mayfly suit very well the mesh design of the Cleanrot Knight's waistcoat, and they live extremely short adult lives. Their wings are even arched back, much like the waistcoat arches down, if you see what they look like side by side. Some species of damselflies and mayflies can live less than 10 minutes, and I think this parallels perfectly the Cleanrot Knights. They know that they will succumb to the rot eventually, but they fight alongside Malenia nonetheless because they believe in her and each other. This feeling of knowing that you will die and your life will be brief, but trying to find meaning and fighting hard to be someone anyway, it just fits so thematically with the Cleanrot Knights, but I personally don't believe it necessarily fits the overarching concepts of Malenia and Miquella fully. Dragonflies come in next, and they are virtually honorary, as I would say they're not only aesthetically but thematically less connected to the Cleanrot Knights. Another honorary mention is the Antlion, who obviously inspired the Falling Star Beast to Astel life cycle. They aren't really an influence here, but I've seen people mention them again. Grasshoppers are also a possibility, but I don't find it very likely that they are connected. They just have the same similar type of wings that arc backwards rather than up. The final answer, which I don't think is completely accurate, is the Dobson fly. Its wings are similar enough, and it has two large mandibles, which I've seen suggested are the inspiration for the winged helm. To be honest, I not only think that they are more akin to a stele, but the mandibles I believe have very little to do with the Cleanrot at all. I'd say that the winged helms are a lot more inspired by Valkyries from Norse mythology, and Malenia's butterfly wings as the goddess of rot than anything else. All of these species, besides the grasshopper, are often found near flowing water and rivers, which is fundamentally important to Malenia's story and rot, with the Blue Dancer and the god of rot that he defeated. In fact, many Cleanrot Knights are also found near water, including the Stillwater Cave and the Swamp of Aeonia. Despite all of those suggestions, if you were like me, the very first four-winged insect that comes into mind is indeed the butterfly. Considering Malenia's obvious connection to them, and her connections also to the Cleanrot Knight, it does make a lot of sense. The waistcoat, however, I don't think looks anything like a butterfly wing. I'd say it looks a lot more like a moth wing. Moths and butterflies are obviously very closely related, but I believe one of the main pieces of evidence that this is a moth wing rather than a butterfly wing is because of the positioning of the wings. Moths' wings fold back over their abdomen, and butterflies fold back over their back. If you compare a moth's wings to the angling of a Cleanrot Knight's waistcoat, I'd say this is most likely where the inspiration has been taken from. I also think the waistcoat has almost the same scaled texture as a moth's wing. I'd happily theorize that Malenia is inspired by butterflies and Miquella is inspired more by moths. Centrina even mentioned on Twitter that Miquella could have some connection to the silk moth, Bombix mori, which I've talked about in my last video. I also said that right this time, I think. Between the cocoon Miquella is in and the other cocoons around the Haligtree, there's plenty of evidence for Miquella's connection. Moths can symbolize rebirth and new life, and the cocoon for Miquella symbolizing his new life as a god makes total sense to me. I'd also hazard to say that Miquella would have most likely designed the Cleanrot Knight's armor himself, as he developed the unalloyed gold it was made of. You can even see the odd wispy silk that Miquella is known for on the Cleanrots in some shots, but moths can also be harbingers of death according to many mythologies. I find it very interesting to note that coming across a dead moth can be seen as an ill omen, and Moog isn't actually that far off from the word moth. Also, as part of my research, I got this absolute gem of a screenshot. Is Moth an omen? He is a powerful omen. Wonderful. One theory that comes to mind as well is that Miquella's sleep is not actually sleep at all. It's actually possible that he is indeed dead, or at least a little bit more accurately, his body is in a vegetative state akin to death. As Zeostorm pointed out on Twitter, Miquella's pose is also much like that of what a silk moth's larvae, a silkworm, would look like when they are entering their cocoon. This becomes even more interesting and a little bit disturbing when we realize that very few silkworms actually ever make it to the stage of becoming a silk moth. Even our practice of harvesting silk requires us to steam and then kill the worm inside, because a moth escaping would ruin the silk. Much like Miquella, many go inside the cocoon and never make it out. Before we continue, here's a quick word from our sponsor, White Mask Varre! Way! Oh, you're back, my dear lambkins. It is I, Varre, your one shining ray of hope in this drab lands between. Take care to listen. I'm here to tell you of the coming of a new dynasty, an Akari dynasty, ranging from the low price of £1 British or $1.5 American. You too can be part of this wonderful Discord community. Luckily for you, we are even accepting the maidenless. You'll even find me there as a... It says here, bot. I'm not sure what that means. However, I will allow it. By joining, you'll be able to converse with the others in the community, including the esteemed Rage Akari themselves. You'll be able to talk about all things Elden Ring, including lore, and perhaps you'll even get a chance to influence some of Rage Akari's future videos. If you wish to pledge more, you'll also perhaps be able to get a sneak peek at Rage's videos a little bit early. The greatest of you, perhaps, may even become a Lord of Blood and influence our great luminary to complete a challenge run in the great game Elden Ring. So go on then. What are you waiting for? Pledge to Rage Akari on Patreon. I have high hopes for you, my lambkin. Bless the Akari dynasty. With love. Thank you, Varre. That was something. Moths symbolize many things across many mythologies. They are indeed found all across the world. Moths in Japan often symbolize the spirits of those who have moved on. Perhaps this may suggest that Miquella's spirit has also moved on from his body. I'll cover this particular concept a little bit more in detail in a couple of my next videos. The connection to Miquella and moths doesn't even stop there. In its intro cinematic, if you pay close attention, you can in fact see two pairs of vestigial, or perhaps more accurately, emergent wings. These look again much like the moth's wings, or perhaps even damselfly wings. It also does indeed make sense for Miquella to have wings, considering his twin Malenia has wings herself. His wings are white, much like his cocoon and the majority of the rest of his general aesthetic. These wings could connect him to a goddess of Greek mythology, Psyche. In Roman mythology, very rarely she is referred to as Anima. She's often depicted as a beautiful young woman with a set of moth wings who embodied the soul of a being. In some tellings of the story, she is said to have been a mortal who was given godhood when Eros, or Cupid, fell in love with her. This has obvious parallels to Miquella. An ever-youthful being who embodies a form of the soul is sometimes mistaken for a girl, especially if we follow the trend of Miquella being Centrina, and grew moth wings. Even Moog being in love with Miquella and wishing him godhood has some ties to this story with the Eros-Cupid line of thought. It isn't a perfect one-to-one, but it feels almost too similar to ignore. There are also even some butterflies named after Psyche. The color white can also be connected to the crown chakra, which connects the body to the astral plane and the divine. It's called the Sahasrara, and is often linked to the lotus flower like Malenia is. Speaking of flowers, Quelag actually did a video on flowers in Elden Ring, and it is a fantastic watch. Again, link in the description. The crown chakra is also connected to flowing energy, which again I feel connects back to flowing water and these continuing motifs between Miquella and Malenia. Those motifs being the dichotomy between flowing water and stagnation. Miquella is so entrenched in the color white and rebirth that perhaps he's intended to symbolize the mental side of Hindu philosophy, and maybe even the concept of rebirth in samsara. Almost all of the Souls games are heavily inspired by samsara, and perhaps Miquella was an example of a being who truly wished to find enlightenment and escape the cycle. Functionally, he wished to reach nirvana. Speaking of which, moth symbolism in Buddhism and Hinduism often invokes themes of overzealousness, over-attachment, and losing sight of what truly matters on a spiritual level. This might actually be accurate to Miquella. Perhaps in reality, Miquella's story is a telling of a being who thought they could fix everything, become a god, and then in the end they flew too close to the sun. A telling of the story of Daedalus and Icarus in a strange way, maybe. This whole moth to a flame symbology is often very connected to moths in general, but it also could be connected to the rot in a slightly odd, different way. We know that fire is good at dealing with the rot, as the Armorer's Cookbook 4 mentions. However, obviously it wasn't perfect, as the armorer who created that cookbook served the great General Radahn, but obviously couldn't deal with Radahn's rot himself. The final mythological inspiration could be from Celtic mythology, one which we know has already inspired Elden Ring quite a lot. In Celtic mythology, moths are believed to be able to move through the supernatural and natural worlds at will, and perhaps even move into worlds like the world of dreams. Pixies are in some cases said to have moth wings, or perhaps even take the forms of moths, and they are often seen as wandering spirits. There's also some very rare symbology between the Morrigan, the Celtic triple goddess of war and mischief, and moths, but I couldn't find any solid evidence, so I'm just going to leave that at that. Now if we move on to Miquella's cocoon itself, it does indeed look like a silk moth's cocoon, but there are some other cocoons which it could be. The common concept is that it could be a spider egg sac. There are some cases where spider egg sacs split down the middle to release many babies. I don't think this is too likely. Besides the cocoon split, there are very few connections. The only other connection is the symbolism of feminine power, considering Malenia being the large fighter as a female, whereas Miquella is small and youthful as a male. And in Mohg's beliefs, his only use is for pushing the family line, shall we say. Another potential candidate is the leech. I don't believe, however, that Miquella is symbolized as the leech in this case, but rather Mohg is. He does come out of a pool of blood inside the cocoon, and also his horns and his skin are dark and somewhat leech-coloured or perhaps inspired. It's also interesting to point out that in the intro cutscene, Miquella's cocoon looks like it's dripping blood. I'd say Miquella's cocoon does not have the same texture as its original counterparts as well. In the intro cutscene and the counterparts in the Haligtree, it's a little bit more soft looking. The final thought is that of a wasp, who lays their eggs in another paralysed being parasitically. The wasp larvae would then grow up and devour the host. We know that the eggs of flesh-eating flies grow from bloody dung. Perhaps the reason Miquella is in his slumber is because he's been forcibly paralysed. However, in this case I'd say the wasp symbology is a little bit more connected to the Formless Mother herself. I'm not necessarily sure I believe too much in any of these other theories. I do think that the moth symbolism is by far the most accurate or perhaps most compelling. The final, and I think perhaps most interesting idea relates back to Miquella's emergent wings. Looking at them, their shape only really connects to one other thing in the entire game: the appendages on the back of the Elden Beast. Perhaps, rather than a simple god like Marika, Miquella was attempting to become like the Elden Beast itself and fully cut out the greater will. Maybe the reason that Miquella's body seems so large while in the cocoon is because he was attempting to become a large creature like the Elden Beast. Or, alternatively, simply cut out Marika and the Elden Beast specifically to become a vessel for the Elden Ring and then a vassal for the greater will itself. I'd say between the two fingers and in some way the three fingers being offshoots of the greater will's divine plan, perhaps the greater will can be divined by potentially another being, much like Miquella in this case. Maybe he simply wished to cut out the middleman. Many people do believe that the two fingers are just rambling and crazy. I mean, Varre definitely does. This could also instead be to do with the Haligtree's current state. Perhaps the reason it was failing is because it lacked an elden beast below it to keep it healthy and prospering, and he wished to become his own version of the elden beast in order to save it and to compete with Marika, the Elden Ring, and the elden beast itself. He would be positioned at the bottom of the Haligtree, actually. Now, speaking of the Haligtree, the next video, yes, it is still in production, will be on the Haligtree. If you think I've missed anything important in this video, please do leave a comment. Once again, I read every single one of them, or at the very least as many as I physically can. Thank you for watching, subscribing, commenting, liking, all of the above. All of them are extremely helpful to me, and I cannot overstate how much it means to me. Everybody who comments on these videos have been overwhelmingly positive, besides that one, but we don't talk about Bruno. And to hit 2,500 subscribers is just madness. I simply genuinely cannot fathom that number. A huge shout out to my Elden Lord Patreon, R-U-W-E, I cannot believe I just said that out loud, and my Lord of Blood Patreon, Vince. Without them, I genuinely could not keep doing this work. And if you want to keep up with me through Discord, subbing to my Patreon is the best way to gain access. Finally, again, a few shoutouts. Firstly, Savonic, who made my banner, Muse, who made the wonderful art for this channel and therefore for the Discord. Also, she made a white mask Varre, and he's a bot. Look at him. I love him. You can find them at Muse_avocado and at Savonic, and you can find me at RageAkari on Twitter. Once again, shout out to Centrina, Quellag, and Zeostorm on YouTube and Twitter. They are all fantastic, and you should definitely check them out next. I won't keep you any longer. As a monstrous man once said,